Time is our most limited resource in life. Today, I'm showing you how an evidence-based comparison of notes versus rental properties led me to restructure my investment approach. Before we dive in, if you're a physician seeking investment strategies that actually respect your clinical schedule, hit subscribe and turn on the notifications. This video is part of a series designed specifically for medical professionals looking to build portfolio income without sacrificing their career or personal time. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Keith and I'm a full-time physician who runs this channel, The Alternative Investing Doctor. Here we discuss alternative investing strategies with special emphasis on mortgage note investments. Today I'd like to discuss rental properties versus mortgage note investments. I believe that both of these assets have their place in a well-structured investment portfolio. The purpose of today's video is not to determine which asset is better. Rather, I want to discuss the pros and cons, and I think they both have their strengths and their weaknesses. Overall, I think that there is a place for both in a well-rounded portfolio, and I personally invest in both of these asset classes. Throughout this video, I'll be sharing some of my analytical framework so that you can evaluate what makes sense for your specific situation and based off of current market conditions. As a quick reminder, the content of this video is provided for educational purposes only. Always be sure to consult with registered or licensed professionals when considering any financial or investment decisions. So both notes and rentals have their advantages. It all kind of depends on what you're really looking for out of each investment strategy. So in particular, notes can offer much higher immediate cash flow. This can be really important if you're looking to achieve your financial freedom number, or if you're looking to replace some of your clinical income, or maybe if you're just looking to get some retirement income to live off of. I do think there is a lot of value in the fact that it is relatively hands-off and the returns can be quite predictable. Really, you just have to log into your servicing portal, check on the note once a month at least. Unless things start to go awry a little bit, then you'll probably have to start speaking with your servicer more frequently. But in general, relatively minimal time investment each month after you actually have the asset on your books. As mentioned, there is a lot of simplicity in that, and really you don't have to do much or any management in a lot of cases, especially with performing notes. Also, you have the protection from calls in the middle of the night at inopportune times regarding repairs or maintenance requests. So what are the advantages the rentals offer then? Well, of course, they do have the potential for long-term appreciation, and that's kind of one of their main benefits and one that most people typically will think about. And they can keep up or outpace inflation, so they do offer some of that benefit as kind of the inflation hedge. There are also the tax advantages that they can offer. In particular, you can get depreciation, which then you can use to reduce some of your taxable income, particularly if you can qualify as what's called a real estate professional. And then there's also the equity building and kind of the control that you have. So you can kind of manage each and every bit and piece of the day-to-day operations. And you can also actually force appreciation in some cases by doing what we call value add strategies. And that might be a full renovation, maybe redoing a kitchen, adding an addition, adding an accessory dwelling unit, things of that nature. So those are some of the advantages that both of them offer. And it's important to kind of consider which of these might be important to you and maybe what percentage you might want to allocate to each of these. You're going to want to consider what would be the ideal balance for you in terms of notes versus rentals and possibly other asset classes that you may want to be investing in. There's a couple of different focuses. You can focus on cash flow, or you might focus more on growth or wealth building. So in the situation of a cash flow focus, it might make sense to put about 60 to 70% of your investment capital into notes and split the rest of that up between rental properties or other investments. If you're more interested in growth over the long-term horizon, you might bring the notes down to about 30 or 40% and then put the bulk of your money actually into the rentals just because, again, notes are really good for producing cash flow today. Not as great as the equity appreciation potential, although there are strategies that can be used to build wealth with notes. And those are some that we'll discuss in later videos on some more advanced note investing strategies. So there are times when we might want to consider one over the other, right? So we might pick notes in environments like we're in now, where rates are on the higher end of the spectrum, and it's difficult to find cash flowing rental properties. That's one issue that's been coming up in the market within the last year or so, where a lot of the rental properties, the price that's being asked by sellers is higher than what would pencil out or make sense if you were to try to use that as a rental property, particularly if you're not buying it with cash, if you're using a mortgage to purchase the property. A big part of that is also, it seems that expenses have really outpaced the rise of rents. So you've seen probably about a 50% in some cases increase in things like your property taxes and insurance, and a kind of average rent increase in the last couple of years across multiple markets has been 20%, give or take. So really the expenses are outpacing a lot of the income potential from these properties. And so in the current market environment, actually now is a better time to be investing in notes, just if you're really wanting cash flow. Now, there are still good rental deals to be had. They're just currently harder to find. And if we transition into another market cycle, as rates come down, if some of these other expenses start to kind of even out, we'll start to see rentals probably becoming going into another rental cycle where it's going to make a lot of sense to start picking up more rental properties. And of course, a big part of it, as we previously mentioned, is you have to think about, do you need the cash flow today, or are you more interested in the cash flow tomorrow or in the future? And then also you have to consider, do you need tax breaks, or are you okay with this being taxed as ordinary income in the case of notes? So, and then I guess the other thing to really consider, right, is can you actively manage it, or do you have time to manage a property manager, or is that something that is not really going to fit on your plate? So again, as I mentioned, it's important to consider expenses when you're looking at rental properties in particular. It can really add up quickly. There's property management fees, maintenance costs, there's costs of vacancies and turnovers, your property taxes, your insurance premiums, and possibly HOA fees. And these are all things that you as the homeowner or investor are responsible for paying. And it's not always possible to cover these increasing costs with increasing rent if your market really doesn't support that. Contrast that with notes, where really the main expense that we have is the servicing fee. Actually, sometimes this can be passed on to the borrower if it is allowed for within the note agreement. But typically that's going to run about $20 to $35 per month, which is much lower than what we're talking about with the expenses associated with running a rental property. There are also hidden time costs associated with rental properties. And as physicians, we need to calculate the opportunity cost of our time. And this is something that many investment courses or gurus overlook. So let's look at some of the time requirements for rental properties. First, you have to find the property. You often have to manage the renovations or oversee contractors. You have to do tenant screening, coordinate maintenance. There's accounting and bookkeeping. And even if you do have a property manager, you do still have to manage the manager and make sure that they're doing their job correctly. Compare this to notes. There is a due diligence process that you must go through when you're screening notes and investments. You have to check on your payment processing with your servicer and review your portfolio periodically to make sure your notes are staying on time and not going delinquent. When you calculate your hourly return based on this investment, it can be a striking difference, where notes typically will take a lot less time than traditional rental property investing. Just as we stratify patient risk factors, let's examine investment risks between rental properties and mortgage notes. Regarding the rental property risks, there are issues that can come up with tenants, such as non-payment or property damage. You can experience vacancy periods, which can reduce your rent for months on end. There could be market fluctuations either in the property value or the rental market, which can affect your sale price, your purchase price, or how much monthly income you can get. And of course, there can be unexpected maintenance costs and issues with management that could arise at any time. Regarding note investment risks, the borrower could default, which could cause you to stop receiving payments. It's also important to consider that property value fluctuations could affect your ability to recoup your investment if you did need to foreclose and take back the property or have it sold at a sheriff sale auction. And also there are some liquidity challenges with mortgage notes that it's often not easy to quickly cash out or sell one of these assets if you run into a difficult situation. To really illustrate some of the pros and cons between these two asset classes, I'm going to go through a case study here with two of my own assets. So the first one is a partial mortgage note on a property located in the Midwest, and the second is a rental property in the Pacific Northwest. As you can see, there is a pretty big difference in the market value of these two properties, but overall the investment was pretty close between the two of them. So the mortgage note partial required a $57,000 investment, and the rental property required $40,000 down. So roughly ballpark in terms of how much investment was needed. Now we can look at the bottom line here, and we have a monthly payment of $1,237 coming from the mortgage note, and the rental property is producing a rent of $2,750 a month. And so on the surface, looks like the rental property should be outperforming the note, but really just the rent alone doesn't tell the whole story. Because of course, as you can see here, that property is financed with a mortgage. So that's a nice low interest rate mortgage, but it does still add some cost to the equation. So if we break that down a little further and include the expenses for each of these assets, we can see that for the note, there are no expenses to add on here because the borrower is actually paying that monthly servicing fee. So that means that the monthly income is also the net income as well. And that produces almost $15,000 per year in cash flow. And then for the rental, so the rent is certainly much higher than that monthly income from the note, but you can see there are a lot of expenses here. So $2,200 are going to principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and then another portion of that is going into reserves for capital expenditures and other miscellaneous expenses that might arise. So that really leaves us only with a net monthly income of $383 a month, or just over $4,500 per year. We looked at some of the differences in the income and expenses, but what are some of the other factors that are involved here? So for notes, once you actually have the asset, there's typically minimal time involved as long as that asset remains a performing note. The duration of the investment is fixed. There is the interest income, and if you need liquidity, you can sell payments to other investors. So you could sell another partial, basically. And you could also borrow against the note as well. As far as the rental, it's much more hands-on, right? Unless you have a property manager that's taking care of absolutely everything. Even still, you do have to keep an eye on the property manager and make sure they're doing what needs to be done. One nice thing about rentals, though, is that you can hold on to them forever, as opposed to notes, which do actually depreciate with time and eventually will come to maturity and you no longer have an asset at that point. But there is also more market risk involved when you directly own the asset. But on the flip side, you have the benefit of when the property value goes up, that's equity that is going onto your net worth statement. And then of course, when it comes to the tax considerations, certainly rentals are the winner here. So you do get depreciation. There are a lot of deductions that come along with that, as opposed to notes, which are basically taxed at your highest rate because they are considered ordinary income. One of the biggest differences between mortgage notes and rental properties as asset classes is really how their income types are classified. In particular, mortgage notes are taxed as interest income, which under the IRS code is considered ordinary income. That basically means that it's going to be taxed at your highest marginal tax rate. Contrast that with rental properties where you have benefits like depreciation, where you can actually offset a lot of the income that you're receiving through rentals, and that can be further magnified if you are able to qualify for what's called a real estate professional status. A powerful way to combine these investments is to put the mortgage notes into your self-directed retirement accounts and to keep the real estate outside of the retirement accounts where you can take advantage of those tax benefits that we've been discussing. This combination can work quite well, and you get a little bit of the best of both of these asset classes without some of the other downsides, particularly with the tax disadvantages that come with note investing. A very common question that comes up between rentals and mortgage notes is, aren't rental properties better for appreciation? On the surface, this does seem to be correct. However, there are ways that mortgage notes do still have advantages here. In particular, you can think of the higher monthly cash flow and those dollars you're getting today really being worth more than the dollars you may get in the future from appreciation, as getting that appreciation paid today rather than tomorrow. Effectively, you're getting paid out the appreciation you would get month to month rather than having to wait for it to come to you through the market in the future. There's also other strategies for long-term wealth building you can employ with notes. For example, you can purchase an entire note and then you can sell a partial, so you can sell off a number of the payments to another investor, and then you can hold on to the tail end of those payments, which still have some value, and you can recapitalize now and use that to invest in other assets, whether that be more notes or more rental properties. Another common concern regarding note investing is the risk of borrower default. I would say that this is not dissimilar from rental properties, where there's always the risk that a tenant could stop paying you rent. In the case of mortgage notes, there are some protections and you do have some options to deal with these situations. You can potentially modify the loan terms, so you can change the interest rate, change the monthly payment. This is usually something that can be worked out with the borrower, and that can usually be in the best interest of both parties. You can always potentially look into doing what's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. This would be a situation where the borrower would actually sign the property back to you. And then, of course, there's always the foreclosure process, which is in some ways kind of similar to eviction, as there's often court proceedings involved, and it can take a long period of time depending on the state. In some ways, a borrow default might be less stressful for you than if a tenant stops paying. For example, with a rental property, you still have to pay all of your monthly expenses, and oftentimes you still have to pay that monthly mortgage. In the setting of a mortgage note, there are still expenses that are accruing, like property taxes and things of that nature, but that's typically going to be tacked on to how much the borrower owes you, and eventually at the end of a legal proceeding, unless there's been a significant drop in the value of the property, there's a better chance that you can recoup your investment in a non-payment scenario. Another common question might be, well, isn't property management the solution for busy physicians to make sure that time involved in their investments is limited? On the surface, I would agree with this statement. However, property managers vary in their quality, and there are a lot of situations where they will still need to contact you for approval. They can manage things like maintenance calls and day-to-day operations of the rental, collecting rents, things of that nature, but they do also typically charge a premium for these services. So there is maybe some savings in opportunity cost, but in real dollar cost, there is probably going to be some more expenses as well. So who might each strategy be better for? Well, rentals might be better for physicians who have a background or interest in property management, or maybe enjoy doing some handy work to save some of those costs on the expenses and maintenance concerns that might arise. It's important for those who might be taxed at a very high rate, who might want to try to reduce their taxes with some of the benefits of real estate rental investment. Rentals are also really good for those who have a strong local market knowledge and those who have good family support systems that might be able to help with some of the management if they want to do some individual management rather than have a property manager. And those who really want that long-term appreciation might find rental properties to be a better fit. Now, notes might be better for physicians who have really unpredictable or demanding schedules and those who are looking to get income without having to really deal with any management or managing a manager. It might also be for physicians who are looking to diversify outside of traditional investments. Maybe you already have a lot of rental properties, and this might be a great thing to add as a complement to your rental properties. It's great for those who value time efficiency, as there's often less day-to-day management needed to manage a portfolio of notes. If this analysis resonated with you as a physician investor, subscribe for more evidence-based investment content designed specifically for medical professionals. Next week, I'll be explaining exactly how notes can provide stability during market volatility. I think that's something that's especially valuable in today's economic climate. Also, please download my free due diligence framework from the link provided in the description to learn more about how to approach individual note investments. I'd also like to invite you to join our private Facebook community of physician note investors where we can discuss real-world experiences and strategies. Search for the link in the description below. Remember, just as with treatment protocols, there's rarely a universal best investment. The optimal strategy is often one that aligns with your specific situation, goals, and constraints. I would be interested to hear from other physicians about their investment experiences. Share in the comments below what's working for you.